How's everyone doing? We're good? We're going to wait for everybody to get out and see if, wow, it's surprising. This is the first time I've done this to an empty room. Huh.
The only brave souls who are willing to talk about AI.
Well, yeah.
I'm still looking for just intelligence.
Just fools.
I would imagine there would be a larger audience, right?
You know, it's funny. Everybody said, oh, I'm going to be there for that. I'm going to be there for that. And none of them are here. Of course, this is one of the warmer rooms, too.
Yeah.
So, but you're sitting down. So, closer? To me? You want me closer? Wow. I can just tune my voice up a little bit. How about that? So actually, I'll just adjust the mic so it actually faces me. I don't really have a problem projecting my voice. Nate, are we ready? You want to go online? Okay, we're about a couple minutes late. Go ahead and start it off, sir.
Oh, that's me. I'm the sir, right?
Well, actually, good question. I don't know.
I thought you just gave the order and I completely forgot what you just said.
It doesn't matter. Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. I'm Gary Adcock. I'm the Executive Director of Filmscape Chicago. And this panel is on generative AI and the cinematographer. And we've got some illustrious people with us. I'm going to start with, is it going to work? Hell no, it's not going to work. Of course not. I'll go old school. First, I'd like to introduce Jay Holben. Jay's a director, producer, author, and a regular here at Filmscape, and we love him for it. So,
oh, that's sweet. I like coming back to Filmscape.
So,
it's my hometown. And I got a little laugh back there. That's what I was going for. Appreciate that. I am an independent director, producer in Los Angeles. I'm a former cinematographer, associate member of the ASC, and I sit on the AI committee for the ASC, Motion Imaging Technology Council.
Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy Jarosz. I'm the virtual production supervisor at Smash Virtual Studios. We're the largest LED VP volume in Chicago. I've been in Chicago my whole life as well, and I'm general technology enthusiast. I enjoy creating things and engineering things, as well as working really closely with productions through the virtual production studio as well.
Next to me, Mauricio Rubinstein, ASC.
I'm Mauricio Rubinstein, cinematographer. I'm based in New York City. I'm here in Chicago for 6 months doing a show called Force. Done tons of independent movies, and when independent movies started to falter, I transitioned into television, and I've been working on cable shows for the last 12, 13 years.
And lastly, I'm Gary Adcock. I'm the Executive Director at Filmscape. I'm a technologist and general bon vivant in the industry, I like to say. I mean, we like to have fun with this. And this is a group of people who three of us know each other. Mauricio is new to our little enclave of the industry. But we want to get together and talk about generative AI and cinematography, and the kind of things that we, as people who work in the film industry, about what we need to do and where we need to go in AI. And we all have very different experiences and very different knowledges on it. Andy, I'm going to start with you, because as a technologist, you do a lot of things, but you're also a product designer and things like that. And people don't realize that you manufacture products like that. And how was AI going to help with development and tools, the tools that you're making for the future of AI, the future of cinematography?
I would say the big thing right now is how good the tools are for helping with coding. Really, I use tools like GitHub Copilot quite a lot, and it's kind of amazing. I always sort of liken it as to having a second brain. Basically, you can have this thing, right, whatever it may be, wherever it gets its information from, I don't know, but you can sort of ask it questions, you can sort of prompt it with certain things, and it can give you sometimes not the exact correct answer, but it can often point you in the right direction or kind of make you think about this problem in a different way that can help. So I've actually found it a very helpful tool when programming. And surprisingly, Even esoteric things. We work with Unreal Engine a lot, obviously, for virtual production. And Unreal has a very unique way of dealing with C++ code, and it's not always evident, because the documentation is quite poor what to do. So it actually is quite helpful in just parsing, breaking things down step by step in that sense. So yeah, I do rely on it for that quite a bit. And as far as like the physical design of things, hardware design, that kind of stuff, there are fewer tools for that. But one of the things that is interesting, that's actually been around for a long time, is something called generative design, which there's tools like Fusion 360 and SolidWorks that you can actually give them a set of parameters. I need a bracket that is made of this material, that's going to hold this much weight, it's going to be this amount of force applied on it. And a machine learning algorithm will actually go through and iterate on thousands of different designs and actually create a material and cost optimized version of that part. And they look really weird. They look like an alien designed them. But that's because they're designed specifically for these exact forces you've put into them. So these are being used for, I don't design these, but these are being used for things like prosthetic limbs, for example, where weight and mass and strength are all super important, things to consider.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point about how generative AI is not just in the cinematography world and everything else. It's the tools around it. It's everything from it. But I'm one of these people that believes that AI is not evil yet, but can be very quickly. Yeah, you smirked first. You get to jump in there, boy.
Well, any tool can be used for evil. A chef's knife can be used to create an amazing, beautiful, wonderful meal, or it can be used to stab the hell out of somebody.
Take your finger off.
Yeah, exactly. It's how you use the tools, but I can't imagine not cooking a meal without a chef's knife. And we're going to get to that point where we're not going to be able to imagine doing our jobs without incorporation of AI in some point. It's going to permeate every aspect of our lives.
Right, and I always, the joke is I don't want it to do my laundry, and I want it to do other things. But literally, in our world, doing laundry is rotoscoping and wire removal and the kind of things that take ridiculous amount of time. So one of the things I heard at NAB this year was a discussion from an Indian cinematographer who actually runs an academy there. And Andy, I think you were part of that discussion at one point with Chitaya. But it was an interesting thing that it's now gotten to the point where the complex tools have made it so inexpensive to do rotoscoping, it's not worthwhile or cost effective in many of the countries we've been farming it out to, India being one of them. And it's like now it's being going to other countries like Thailand and Vietnam and other places because of the tool sets have gotten so sophisticated. And I'm surprised at that. Mauricio, as somebody who works in cinema and is looking at the next generation of things, how does this affect you? And how do you think about where this is going?
Well, it's not become yet part of my life on set, but it's become part of my life in post-production. I haven't used it, but I know the existence of a tool that corrects blemishes on a face, and all you have to do is you correct it once, and it takes care of correcting it all the way through. So the colorist doesn't have to actually do that by hand anymore. So that is something that is affecting directly post-production in my case. I also hear the fact that the bokeh can now be added to and modified to any image, that you can add or subtract smoke or atmosphere, and you can choose where to add it, at which layer. And if you have too much somewhere, you can remove it. And if you have too little, you can add it. So I'm seeing that we're getting tools that are really interesting to work with, going from the conception of an image, of a style of a shoot, to being able to modify things that happen from, let's say, from the background, from the set, from what we see through the windows or an exterior back, and then from that we see forward. So now it's a whole range of transformation that can be manage through us to recreate or create whatever situation we're thinking about.
Well, that's an interesting thing to think about, that we're now at the point where visual effects can do, literally anything we want it to do at this point in time. And while that's not necessarily AI, it's driven by the same kinds of tools that we would use in other ways. One of the things I like to think about is you brought up colorists, and we don't talk about post-production much at Filmscape, and we should, but it's like, what Data Valentik's application, Color Lab AI, I drew a blank on that. Color Lab AI, he's built those automatic tools in there. And a lot of people who do post-production, they don't think about when they drop something in, it actually automatically sees the type of camera and type of color space that it's in, and it creates a proper, limited color space for you to work in your edit flow. And that's actually an interesting process because it shows where the manufacturers have been working all along to be able to do that. I mean, remember when we used to have to sync dailies? Almost never do that anymore because the software controls it automatically. It sees it automatically syncs together. And those are the kind of tools that make life easier for everyone. I love some of the post-production tools that actually allow you to take out pauses and breaths to limit how much somebody does anything. Andy, as somebody who's working in virtual production and a lot in visual effects, but has a studio that has all kinds of things, what are some of the on-set things that you might think of in using AI tools for?
Yeah, there are a number of companies working on tools to be able to create, backgrounds for virtual production. I will say none of them are very good right now. So while our eye is definitely on them, and there's definitely a lot of clients that we could see utilizing them. Obviously at like the high-end, feature film level, there's a level of discernment, a level of attention to detail that's not going to be represented by these tools for quite a long time, if ever. But for a lot of just commodity production, it's fine, right? These can actually, very realistically, I could see them getting to, where these kinds of commercial style clients need to get to very quickly. And I think that's a very interesting type of aspect. I also think, that's like, the idea, right? Oh, we can generate backgrounds, we can generate 3D worlds, right? But like Mauricio was saying, he's alluding to a tool in Nuke called Copycat, where you can paint out a blemish, or you can add in a bruise on someone in one frame, train a mini AI on your particular shot, and have it replicate that data across the entire shot. It's not sexy, it's not big and feeling like it's going to change the world, but it's important because it's saving time. That's manual labor that an artist would have to do that might take him an hour, that now takes 20 seconds, right? And those kinds of time savings multiplied over the course of a show really add up, and are those small things are going to really drive us forward with these tools, I think.
Well, as much as we're doing in-camera visual effects, that becomes a mere play because we're delivering footage that's closer and closer to being, directly usable in post. And now they have that blemish correction or anything else, not very different than what you're doing in TikTok or Instagram now. It's kind of interesting. And I don't think people realize that the tools that we have in our phones are driving AI into the larger cinema space. I mean, I look at Lume AI and its capability to do NeRFs and Gaussian splatting, where we're now doing point clouds of information to be able to create objects or environments to use inside of virtual production. And I think the whole move towards in-camera visual effects is directly going to be affected by the generative AI that's coming up. Want to take that, Jay? No.
I agree.
I think I can elaborate a little bit further, but imagine again, obviously we're in a period of time right now where all these companies are trying to raise a lot of money. So we're gonna be seeing a lot of these big wow, we can do everything kind of tools. But I think kind of to that point where we're going to land is more imagine a tool that can look at a live camera feed, be like, hey, just so you know, the light on this shot is half a stop brighter than it was on the turnaround. You can, maybe it's intentional, maybe not, but it just is. Here's that information for you, right? These little kind of assistants, these little kind of I mentioned before, second brain kind of things. I think once these sort of get added into bigger suites are going to add up to these kinds of major life-changing things. But it's not going to be, I don't think we're going to have an experience where overnight everything's suddenly just going to be different. I think it's going to be incremental things like that. And all of a sudden, before we know it, things are just different.
Right. And I go back to the common phrase I utilize a lot when I'm talking. It's like it's either evolution or revolution. One is slow and consistent and takes a long time. The other one is very radical and very painful. So, and that's something that we have to deal with. Jay, in your world, as a producer and director, how do you see these tools influencing script production for anything else? And not necessarily to generate them, but to, to format them in a simple way is an interesting way to think about that.
Sure. I mean, we've had, software-assisted formatting for decades. Where I think that this technology is really interesting, and I had this discussion quite passionately with writers during the writer's strike, is, especially when we talk about television writers, one of the hardest things to do is to break a story. Mm-hmm. So you have a team of 6, 8, 10 writers sitting in a room, they're looking at the next episode, and they're all spitballing ideas back and forth, and they're trying to figure out how to break that next story. To have an AI that understands the entire series, that understands the Bible, and says, we want an episode about this character, and spits out 12 ideas, and then the writers look at it and say, hey, that's a good one. What do we do with that idea? And then they go, right. Why are we rejecting that concept? That's taking the pain out of the worst part of it and allowing the artist to do their job. And that's where so much of this is headed, is like you've been talking about, rotoscoping and all of these pain points and these time-consuming points. If we can eliminate that or reduce it and let the artist do what the artist is going to do, these are amazing, powerful tools.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing on my side of it for conceptual artwork, it's invaluable. What we can do to inspire a look, what we can do to get a concept across quickly and inexpensively, especially for lookbooks and pitches. As a director, I'm pitching projects and getting scripts and trying to get my idea across. And I'm not getting paid to audition for a job, so I can't hire a conceptual artist, but now I can create a lookbook that is wholly unique, that isn't still frames where they're saying, oh, that's Blade Runner, and oh, that's Batman, and oh, that's Star Wars. This is completely unique to my vision of what this is going to look like and get that across. And I absolutely love the tools for that.
And it shows the creative ways we can use this tool. I mean, the people who are afraid of it are going to lose their jobs. It's evolution or revolution. And if you're not thinking about the aspects and the technologies around to make your life simpler, to make your life better, I don't know why anybody is rejecting that ability to expand their creativity in a way that they hadn't thought of before.
Technological advancement always displaces somebody.
Yeah, look how many chimney sweeps there are in the city of Chicago.
As well,
Probably are still some.
Well, there's still few, and they're very bespoke, and I think about, and people don't think about how Teamsters got their name, but they used to drive a team of horses. Yeah. And there's not a lot of horses around except, down around Michigan Avenue. And it's the kind of thing you think about is that these positions are evolving at all times.
One of the things I was thinking about earlier is I remember when we were going through the digital revolution, there was a lot of talk that there would be no more need for lights, right? That lighting was going to go away. And in fact, look where we are now. The lighting industry is stronger than it's ever been. It took some time for people to for the technology of lighting to evolve as well. But it's interesting that the prediction was just simply false.
I kind of wait for the point when, if there's another strike, if there's not a lighting guy on every quarter with a tin cup and a light for 5 cents or $5 now, or a will light for Starbucks, kind of thing. So, Mauricio, as a cinematographer and the kind of shows you work on, Force and the rest of them, what do you see as something to gain from AI and how it'll affect you as you go forward in your career?
Well, the most immediate effect I've seen on it is the use of rotoscoping, where in a lot of action scenes we shoot, we do not require any more for green or blue or gray backgrounds. That is something that saves a lot of time, but also is something that opens a lot of opportunities and takes away a lot of limitations. because you don't have to be fighting anymore the kick of the green or the blue light. You don't have to be having a distance. You don't have, so a lot of those hurdles are gone, and now you just proceed directly, and there's a supervisor there and says to you, that's good for me, I can work with that. And actually, you do a scene one day, and the next day they already show you a rough result of the pieces you shot and how it's going to look like until they finish it properly. But those assemblies happen very fast. So I think the communication between the cinematographer and the people in post-production and the people on set that are linking the two parts is fundamental, and it's evolving in a very consistent way. It's not like a dramatic change from one day to the other, in the sense of you having to change the way in which you do things to the extent that you have to accommodate now for this new technology. On the contrary, the technology is coming to help you do your thing. And I was thinking, for example, prior to the director I have now, she was here and she was going to go to Florida to do a couple of episodes of another show, and she's from Florida herself, and she says, oh, in Florida it rains all the time. And I say, She says, so I'm talking to them that in the sets we create rain. And I say, oh, have you understood what all that implies? And he says, well, you just collect the water. And I say, well, you have to collect the water. You have the problem with sound, because they'll hear the rain, but also the density of the water for it to read through a window in the background, and they have to put light through the rain, and that also light your characters and your set. That's doable, but it takes a lot. It's not something you can do on a TV show where you have to go 6-7 pages a day, right? So I just think like, hey, why don't you do AI rain, right? Now you choose exactly where, and you do it. Now if you have, instead of having a drop, you have an LED screen, you can add it also on the LED screen, you know? You're going to start, it's like you have a table full of ingredients and you start putting them into the pot.
Well, and that brings up the point where there's a lot of things, particularly in visual effects, of how we're doing gunfire. Where we're doing, I mean, it's much, much safer because of the rust incidents. It's really reinforced the nature of not using full armors on set, and with the danger that's implied with that. And now doing, and there's a number of actors, the one I think is really funny is John Wick actually uses a lot of secondary, added on gunfire and muzzle flashes in a way that now can be done rather easily as they programmed a specific application to be able to do all the blue eyes in Dune. Because it was easier to do it that way. And you program it, much like the blemish collection, it's not any different. It's a different piece on the blemish collection. And there's companies that are actually doing real-time face transplants, doing de-aging and aging on that. On one of the ASC AI things, Don Burgess was talking about that with the
new Bob Zemeckis movie.
Yeah. And it's interesting, but they're actually doing real-time aging and de-aging of actors. The one thing I thought that was odd about that they didn't do hair. And they talked about they had to have the makeup and everything in there, but it made it easier for them to do it in real time if the hair matched the period they were trying to match to, as a mimic of what it was. Because they weren't replacing, it's not, Aquaman where they're replacing all the hair every time because it's supposed to be underwater. So
I was probably answering a text at that moment. I didn't remember that.
But But I think this whole thing with generative AI, one of the things that comes up is legal stuff. And we had a session upstairs earlier today that we were talking about the contract issues and things like that. How much can you have in an image? What can you copyright? How are you going to be able to use it, and how much of the image it is, and whether you manipulated it in a certain way to be able to maintain the creativity over that. And that's an interesting discussion in all of this, because a lot of people don't think about that when it's like, oh, I'm going to use generative AI and I'm going to build all my backgrounds and I'm going to do all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, if it's not real and it's not from your creativity and you had a machine do it, because it's not created by a human, you can't get a copyright for it. So you wonder about the ability to do that for commercial work, for industrial work, or for a major motion picture.
It's going to change. Right now, the precedent is you can't copyright it. So if you've got a book and you've got a AI-generated image in it, that image cannot be copyrighted as part of the book. But I think that that's going to change. It's going to change with a lot of these battles that are being fought. We can't continue that way because we're going to be using these tools. Mm-hmm. And the companies and the individuals creating it needs to be able to hold a copyright. I take real umbrage with the idea that it's not original and that it's thievery. And I hear this on a constant basis. One of the biggest arguments against AI is it's plagiarism, right? You're stealing from other artists. And the truth is that as artists, we steal from other artists on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. You know, and much more deliberately than AI ever will. I'll be on set and I want that shot from Raiders, that 32 mil push in. But, oh yeah, great, what we're gonna do is set up the dolly, we're gonna get that shot, and we're gonna mimic exactly what Dougie Slocum and Steven Spielberg did. It's a direct ripoff and stealing. AI is looking at billions of images and coming up with something completely new, original, and unique. So much so that consistency right now is so difficult to achieve because it's a brand new iteration every time.
Well, and that brings up a really interesting point because, you know, everybody talks about, oh, these AI things are going to take over everything, but have you ever seen any of them run longer than 10 or 15 seconds? I mean, the longest one now I've seen is 15 seconds. And the fact that we're building models that still hallucinate, they create multiple fingers and variations of it, or your thumb just vanishes in part of the shot. That's kind of an interesting sidebar to all of this that people aren't talking about, that the tools are not quite up to speed to be able to redo what we do as in cinema and production for film and television.
I was going to say, I agree with Jay on the idea of plagiarism, right? Like if I, you know, got into the film industry because I like Star Wars, basically, right? So does the fact that Star Wars exists inside of my brain because I've watched it 100 times mean that by proxy everything I create is in some way plagiarism? I don't think so. I hope not, right? If you recreate that shot from Raiders, it's an homage. So if an AI does it, it's plagiarism. Like, it's an existential question. At some point, a line, like you said, is going to have to be drawn.
Well, and Spielberg even admitted when he did Raiders that he copied it off the serialized things of the 40s and 50s.
Of course, he's ripping off Alfred Hitchcock and Howard Hawks and John
everybody,
Ford. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also, you're mentioning, like AI hallucinating and it getting wrong, right? That also comes back to this idea that of like intentionality, right? Artists are aware not only of the thing that they're making immediately, but the context that surrounds it. And that is something that an AI, I think, honestly, by definition, just can't do. It's artificial. It doesn't have that broader context and that deeper meaning behind it. It just does what you ask it to do. And for a lot of things, that's perfect. It's exactly what you want. But then you start to get into that stuff where there's extra fingers. And it's like, an artist knows that's wrong, but an AI doesn't know why that's wrong. And it doesn't matter how much information you give it, it's still not going to understand why it's wrong, even if it can say, oh, maybe it is wrong. So that's one of the things that I'm worried about. I'm less worried about the plagiarism side of it. I'm more worried about that it will create a broader acceptance of mediocrity, right? Oh. I know someone who came in the other day and he's like, I wrote a screenplay. I'm like, did you write it or did ChatGPT write it? And he's like, ChatGPT wrote it. It's like, that's scary to me. That's way more scary than plagiarism because that's going to become prevalent, right? And that lower standard of quality is going to start to become more and more accepted as these tools become more prevalent. That's terrifying to me.
But, sorry, I would compare that to the transition between film and analog digital, where those of us who still defend the pristine qualities of emulsion, right, say digital will never match film. But people don't understand that. People look at it in a different way, and generations go by, and a lot of young people today have never seen print being screened. It's always been digital, so the vision also changes. So we also have to understand that mediocrity and commercialism and low budget and cheap and all that will follow. There's no way that we can avoid that, right?
I do have the new Pentax film camera waiting for me at home. So.
But in fairness, our business has survived on mediocrity. We succeed at the lowest
I need that on a
possible barrier, right? We look at why did we go to 24 frames a second? Because it was the absolute minimum, economically.
Yeah.
Film prints were a compromise. They're a reduction off the camera negative, and we just became used to it. That's our look. That's what we fell in love with. But it's a degradation. It's a reduction off the original. So yes, there is a danger of people dealing with six-fingered characters or inconsistencies. I work very closely with a director now who is working intensely in AI. And she just tested one of the new applications and posted it to Twitter, and it got ripped down by animators. Like, that's inconsistent, and the bezels around her arm are changing. It's like, well, that's not the point right now. It's just showing where technology can go. But yeah,
it's the Viper, it's the start of the digital era, and I think about it, and it's like, and we did anamorphics for the same reason. We did anamorphic lenses because shooting 60 millimeter film and, cutting it in half to be able to run it through a projector didn't work that way. So we shot anamorphic because we could get that same widescreen perspective on a 35 millimeter frame. I mean, and let's go back to DVX 100 and HVX 200 and the cameras, the first digital cameras, they were horrible. And while they did a lot of things and we were able to create new technology with them, they were really bad at taking pictures and had limited, I mean, the HVX 200 had barely 8 stops of range. And we laugh about that now. And we come from film that had, luminance and everything else. And as we go through the transition, there has to be the breaking point where it's, let's talk about when phones were new and nobody would use them for anything. And now a lot of stuff is being done on phones. So the technology is always advancing around us. And those of it that see it and willing to guide where it goes have an advantage over everybody else. But that's part of what we're here to talk about is to remind people that this is a constantly changing industry. It's a constantly moving forward and sideways and going backwards and everything else all at the same time, because that's what it does. But as you said, the mediocrity of television has been one of those things that carried through for a long time.
I didn't say television.
Late night television.
I feel about AI the exact same way that I did about early digital cameras. Looking at the F900, there were so many cinematographers who looked at it and said, this is trash, this is never going to do it. And I looked at it and said, it's never going to get worse than this. It's only going to this is the baseline, and we're going to continue to improve. It's going to get better on a constant basis, and AI is going to be the same way.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And I think that's what it's all about.
The one thing, I do agree with that. It's obviously going to get better. I mean, technology always gets better. The one thing that concerns me about that, though, is like, you look at, like, the F900, right? And it's like, okay, it's HD. It's a broadcast camera that's been repurposed for cinema reasons, right? It's obvious how it could be improved. We need more dynamic range. We need more resolution. We need a more purpose-built body, right? You can look at it and it's like, it's very evident what needs to be done to make it better. The issue what concerns me is that you hear like, oh, OpenAI has 10,000 NVIDIA Tesla GPUs, right? So what are they going to do? What else are they going to do, right? And maybe they'll come out tomorrow and blow everyone away and change the world. And maybe they won't. Maybe they've hit what the limit as to what is possible with silicon-based computing, right? So what I'm saying is it's less obvious what needs to be done to improve the product. And the way that at least current iterations of AI work, really all they can do is just keep throwing training data at it and kind of keep hoping that it improves on its own.
Well, and that, gee, what happens when DSLR came to the market and they did, one episode of House on 5D?
It still holds up to this day, by the way. It's great.
And it's amazing that I remember the furor that went on there. And I kind of laughed because one of the jobs I did early on when they first started being able to do was go teach news people who worked on print newspapers, how to use the first digital cameras to capture local sports. you know, so they could put it on the website and show, you know, the local high school football team. And now it's become to the point that it was in cinema, and now they're used virtually everywhere, and the sensors have evolved to a point where they have very high quality and you know, the unmatched capabilities. But it still gets down to those have lenses and things on them, and how are optics? I mean, you and I had a discussion weeks ago about just how optics have evolved in the last few years, and how just like lighting has, and there's a lighting, you know, there's basically a new lighting company on every corner. The lens manufacturers have gone the same way, and they're using the same AI and tools that we're talking about to create faster, cleaner, newer forms of optics that we haven't seen before. I mean, the fact that there's been a resurgence from anamorphic manufacturers to have lenses that do a very specific optical pathway are kind of interesting.
You really just throw me a lens question, did you?
Oh, yeah.
How
You had to bring Star Wars into it. You know, you had to bring Star Wars into it, so I had to fight back.
You're absolutely right. And actually, there's a great paper that Ian Neal wrote in the 80s about where optical design was going to go, and he was talking about AI in it. We used to deal with it taking months and months and months to ray trace with a slide rule the optical design of a particular lens. Now we have software who can do it in machine learning in seconds, and we can iterate things substantially faster.
And iterate a plastic version of it in almost real time.
Exactly. We get 3D printing to test mechanics, and we're ending up with many, many, many more tools that are showing up in the marketplace, giving artists more options. So instead of saying, no, you only have Panavision C-Series, now you've got dozens and dozens of anamorphics you can choose from.
So Mauricio, as an imager and somebody who does this, do you take advantage of some of the new tools? I mean, I know you do, that's why I'm asking, but it's like, what are some of the things that you are looking at in how technology is going forward and how you're going to bring it into your work?
I'm going to bring it into my work depending on the job I get, the budget I have, and the need and the concept of what I'm doing. But, you know, anything that can help me to be creative, to create the images I want to create, I'm embracing. I don't see AI as an enemy coming to tell me how to do things. I don't see it as something that's overpowering my creativity. I see it as a resource and as a tool that I will be applying in as much as I can in the future to make what I'm doing, making pictures, telling stories.
See, that's the best part about it, because those of us that are looking at this and trying to find ways not just to utilize the technology, but to advance it as part of our vision is the end-all be-all for all of this. We're using the tools and technology that are given to us to be able to drive our mindset forward and the vision that we have, and to create a new look or a new idea or a new concept of what we want to do. And I think it's a great time to be able to push the boundaries on everything.
You know, like I would take for an example, some years ago, anytime you had a window on a location, it was a nightmare to fight the outside exposure and the inside exposure. So your interior was or too dark, or your exposure outside was clipping, right? Now we're somewhere where that problem has been fairly well solved by the more advanced cameras. But there remain to be so many other things that could be so useful to us being on set or on location that could, in that same way, make us advance our job. And I don't mean it only in a creative way, but I also mean it in a schedule and cost way, because you see that budgets are starting to become smaller and shooting days are getting to be less. And so the 1 hour shows that were 13, 14 days are now 10, 11. And that is a trend that is just going to continue, because what is happening is the studios are pushing and they say, oh, now you're going to do it in 11, and God knows how you do it, but you do it in 11. And they say, you see, you can do it in 11. Let's try 10, right? And we keep on, because we are proud of what we do, we keep on validating that, and we keep on succeeding at doing that, then that continues. So having tools that will allow you to be able to do that without having to put so much energy into solving some problems you can encounter on set or on location would be ideal. You know, if I can have a tool, just thinking about it, this is a problem I encountered recently. Sun is moving, it's a day exterior, right? In the earlier shots, the forehead of the actor feels warm because of the sun. And as the sun starts to turn around, now it's the sky. So the forehead gets a little bit bluer. So I see that on my color correction, and I say to the colorist, were you asleep when you were doing this? Can you see how it changed from yellow to blue in 3 seconds? What's the reason? Oh yeah, you're right, I'll work on that. Imagine that you could have a tool that you just say, okay, the sun was here, and the sun moved, but this is my subject, and this is how it looked in the sun, and so for continuity, I want it to stay that way. You go and solve that. I don't have to take care of it anymore. I don't have to go crazy on set about how much can I tweak, how far can I turn the character so that I can keep the relationship to the sun, because you have a limit as to how much you can cheat.
Well, and that brings up the new tools like text editing, where you literally go through script sync on Avid for serialization, where you go in and you mark the line in the take, and it grabs the clip immediately and builds a dynamic cut list automatically. And those tools are available now. And the ability to actually go through and search in an NLE, a nonlinear editor, to be able to search for specific words or specific breaks and be able to use that as part of the edit information is great. And some of the things out there, I mean, some of the tools for audio are kind of amazing. I mean, you know, the podcasting tool that Adobe shipped long before that, that takes out hiss and hum and can take machine noise out for podcasters, has now been integrated directly into Premiere. And those kind of tools are pretty advanced. And now, you know, Resolve does the same thing, very similar through Fusion. And it's just interesting that the tool sets we're doing those are the kind of things I want done. I want to be able to click a button and it takes the hum out of the background. You know, 60-cycle hum has been the bane of our existence for many years. And you get it everywhere in the machines behind us and that. And being able to automatically limit those and automatically correct that kind of audio is one of those tools that I see as a benefit, because we're taking things that we are creatively done and just enhancing what the capability of it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work that is done in this industry that's just, it's busy work, right? It's not creative work. Nobody really wants to do it. It just has to be done. But, you know, rotoscoping is something that was mentioned earlier. Also, when we're doing 3D modeling, we do a process called UV unwrapping, which essentially is a way of converting the 3D model into a 2D space so that it can be textured. It's not fun. Nobody wants to do it. It's tedious. There are semi-automated ways to do it, but at the end of the day, to do it well requires an artist. But it's just not a job anyone wants to do. Those are the kinds of tasks that I think would be amazing for AI tools to just handle. And I could easily see a world where we just don't have to worry about that in the future. I think that'd be fantastic.
Go ahead.
I had an experience in Camera Mesh last November. I saw this clip of an Italian movie, period, old sailboat, and basically what they did is they mapped all the lenses. The system was rotoscoping the whole thing and adding digitally created backgrounds, which were all consistent with the aberrations of the lens, whichever lens they were using. And it was shot with the boat being tied to a pier. And whatever was in the back was in the back. Everything would get erased. And I asked, well, what happens if the scene says it's a sunny day and now you have an overcast, or it doesn't match with what you shot yesterday in terms of environment? And they said, doesn't matter. We can deal with that. So I feel that when you can be given the opportunity to stretch your creativity without those limitations of having to use a water tank and a stage and a green screen and a reproduction and artificial waves, and if you can just concentrate on making the basic pictures and telling the basic story, and the rest of it is being taken care of, and you can do it under those circumstances, it's fantastic. It's fantastic that you would be able to shoot something anywhere and place it anywhere else. And why not? Why does it have to be the real place? You're still driving the story. It's not the story driving you, right? You're still driving your story. You're still dealing with your actors, with your characters, with your moods, right? And the rest of it, well, it's somebody else collaborating with it. Is my image going to be less if I shoot it in a stage that is all constructed, or if I shoot it on green screen? I think the art is the same art,
Not a cinematography topic, but you kind of broached on the post-production tools. One of the hardest things for independent filmmakers now is making a profit in the streaming world. And one of the better avenues for that is foreign distribution. The most uncomfortable thing about releasing a film in one language in other regions is it's either have to be subtitled or it's dubbed. We now are implementing tools to AI change the actor's mouth to respond in the actor's voice to the native language for that region. So we make a completely native film with the same performances of the same actors in a different language, and that is so ridiculously exciting to me. It opens the field for more people seeing films and enjoying them the way that they're meant to be seen without the barrier of a language issue. And that's where this technology is really invaluable.
Well, and we talk about that things, but I had an instance in LA last week where literally my cab driver was Ukrainian, and he just had two phones, and one was the Uber, and the other one he had live transcription going on between Ukrainian and English. And it would just talk back to it. I'd talk to it, and then it would respond in Ukrainian, and then he'd speak, and then it would respond to me in English. And it was a real-time translation thing. It took a couple of seconds, but it was fascinating to me because I'd never seen anybody use the technology in real time like that before. And it shows where this is going. And it's not just that, it's real-time translations for phone calls and Zoom calls. I mean, I've seen real-time inline translation of multiple languages on a Zoom call over a year and a half ago. And the fact that it's only gotten better and faster and everything else. And we're talking about, 30, 50 millisecond delays in a translation that comes directly to you. And I find that fascinating, because it's the same thing. We are not bound by the language barriers that are built around the individual countries.
It's the Star Trek Universal Translator.
Yeah.
We have it, yeah.
You brought Star Trek into it again.
I had to. I got to geek out a little bit.
At least we got both of them, Star Trek and Star Wars. When are you going to bring up Babylon 5 next?
How does it translate languages that I've never heard before? I never understood that. Yeah. Like, how does it work in Voyager at all? That's not.
Well, but it's AI.
Oh.
See, and that's the things that we've had in front of us as inspiration for this, as much as phones and tablets. I mean, how many, we went Star Trek first run, and the hands are a tablet, and they're doing things on tablets, and now we all have them. And you don't think about how the technology that we have is reflected in the films and televisions that we watch that also drive our memory forward. It's interesting that you see it that way, that we all see it that way. And it's not individual to any one of us, but just how the things we do kind of drive forwards. It's Robbie the robot, Danger Will Robinson, Danger Will Robinson. And now we've got robotic dogs that are actually doing surveying. We've got a rover on another planet in the solar system that's kind of zooming around and sending its little helicopter up to examine things for us. There's a lot of AI built into that because it has to be an automated system because it's a 47-second delay for the signal to get back and forth. And people don't think about that. And it's the tools that have been used around us for a long time that have changed already. I mean, people don't think about Siri and Alexa as AI assistants, but they are.
Or Google Maps.
Google Maps or Apple,
Waze.
yeah, any of them, and how they do it and how it's a generated informational. We've built the own data sets for that. Google Maps, Apple Maps is an aggregated amount, just like Waze was. We thought Waze was it's the end-all, be-all. It reads traffic and tells me where to go and tells me how to avoid things. And now that's built into the mapping software and GPSs we carry around in our pocket. And that's the thing with all of this is we talk about technology and AI and how it works is we have had it for a very long time. You just weren't paying attention. Autocorrect on your phone, whether you like it or not, it's still generated from those kinds of issues. And those are the things that we use every day that are based in these same technologies. I find it interesting, the Adobe flap about the terms of agreement because nobody knew how to read contracts, and they simplified it but left all the same things in there. But then you have Apple coming up and say, we want to be a little different. We're going to do it on device as much as we can. And those are the things that reinforce people's fear of sending things to the cloud or sharing things over it is. And it offers tool sets for us to go forward in.
There's a lot of fear with every new technology, right? I talked this morning, and I said when photography was first introduced, classic painters were dismissing it and saying this is obnoxious, and all you do is hit a button, and that this isn't real art. Well, obviously we've proven them wrong in that respect. But it always comes with a lot of fear. And I think the most that we can do is mitigate that fear and try to understand the technology and where it works. One of the examples I know we talked about a few months ago, not in filmmaking, but a doctor can see so many thousands of x-rays in their lifetime. But if they have an AI that has seen billions of x-rays, then it can help that doctor diagnose something faster. Not that the AI is doing it, but the AI is giving them more information and more experience than they could ever have. And it's assisting so that we're helping life all around.
And that's an important part of all of this too, because those kind of medical advances will come from it. The CRISPR stuff that they just released just last week on being able to generate things and how all of this relates to self-driving cars and everything around us. And the medical stuff I find really interesting because now we'll be able to find out, all of the variables that cause everything. And it could, it'll take a while to get through the human body, but we're at a tipping point in how the world is going, where we can actually start creating environments that protect us from ourselves, which is a dangerous thing too. Any questions? We got like 5 minutes left. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir, right there in the front. So I'm going to rephrase that so the people online can hear it. It's a question about how that many of the non-conforming AI companies are mining their image databases in large language models from content that's available online that may or may not be copyrighted information. I'll give a reference on that and I'll let everybody speak, because there's a really interesting case right now of a company who did just that by training off the public Getty library images. And the images that they generate now come up with the gray Getty bar in some way or fashion in there. But let's talk about that, the unscrupulous aspect of mining these large language models and how it affects, and how it affects us as artists and people out there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I may have an idea what these guys are going to say, so I'm going to try and say something different, which is that if you look at some really big companies, right? If you look at companies like Apple, like SpaceX, for example, companies who are really innovating quickly and trying to really push the boundaries of what they're doing, they actually don't patent a lot of things, because they know that by time anyone else in the field catches up, they'll be long gone. They'll be on to the next thing, right? That's always been my personal mentality as an artist, as a technician, as an engineer, right? I've never really held on to patents, held on to copyrights, even though I absolutely could have. And the reason is because I just keep pushing forward. If what I'm making is so easily replicatable by somebody else or by something else, then to me, that's not good enough. I need to keep evolving myself personally, my own personal skill set. So I just you gotta be smarter than the computers. You gotta beat the computers. Don't let the Terminators win.
Well, and I take that for a different reference, because as somebody who started as a traditional still photographer and did product photography, those were disposable images. You got paid for them and then you didn't care anymore. You know, you're shooting an object on a white background. You don't really care. There's no copyright involved in that. You don't do that. And so it also depends what kind of art you do. Jay, what do you do enough on both sides of the realm to be able to kind of trip across both of them.
I go back to what I said a little bit earlier, that everything that I create, everything that I do is based on what I've experienced and what I've seen in my life. I try to watch about 300 films a year, or about 600 hours worth of either television or film as part of the career, right? So I have a basis of seeing what's out there and knowing what other people are creating, so that it informs what I do. Mm-hmm. But that's a limited world. I only have 40 some odd years of experiencing, and that's what I'm tapping into. By giving AI access to the internet and to the billions and billions and billions of images out there, it gives it a much larger data set to build things from. I have not really seen examples of straight plagiarism. What I've seen that people complain about are do something in the vein of. So create an image in the style of Rembrandt. Okay, but so has thousands of artists since Rembrandt painted artists.
All of his students. All of his students.
Right, yeah, exactly. And Rembrandt, doing Caravaggio as well. So I don't know, I don't see an issue with it, and I don't see the copyright issue with it, because we're generating something completely unique, as opposed to I'm taking that Getty image and now putting it on a box. Yeah. That's a different world. But a lot smarter lawyers and courts will fight this out.
Yeah, and we're behind, and everybody needs to know that we're actually behind the EU specifically in all of this and how to do it. So.
Well, yeah, the EU gives cinematographers more of a control over their image than the US does.
Right, yeah. You get to control the entire process, not just shooting it. You don't get left out.
Sorry, I was referring to a legal challenge that is actually pointing to the terms of service in some of these social media platforms that has to do with the idea that it would actually be illegal to build a product that's designed to replace, the concept art example. If I make a piece of concept art, you can't take the concept art and feed it into a machine that replaces concept artists. You can say that the machine generates something new, but also newspapers are trying to sue OpenAI and similar, and Facebook and anyone who's trying to make these models, and say you can't feed our newspaper articles into your machine if you're building a product that people are going to use to make movies.
Well, but again, a very long question, and I'll try and paraphrase a little bit. But you're worried about that the social media companies or people using the social medias and the social media companies themselves are mining data from the image set that's online. And it's not any different. This is what we've been talking about. It's the same modeling and everything else. And you know, and it's not just Apple and Google and Instagram and Twitter and, you know, TikTok. It's Salesforce and Google Drive and Google Docs and Google Notes and every other application that you work on a cloud platform. And, you know, you're only limiting it to the images, but we've been pushing vast amounts of data up to the cloud as reference material for businesses and everything else. And all of that's been going on for a couple of decades now, that we've been using cloud shared spaces for not just images. So you're focusing on one aspect of it, but ignoring something that's been there for a very long time, because you've been using these resources with Google Drive and everything else. The problem is that when we got to the point of being able to take all of this mobile on a phone, and iPhone specifically was one of the key points in that, we were able to start aggregating data at a vastly greater amount than we'd ever been able to do before. And, you know, none of the companies that I mentioned in that line, other than Google, were there before iPhone. And that's an interesting aspect too, that a simple piece of technology that was a reference from, you know, an advancement over flip phones became a fundamental way to shoot it. And now we're using those same phones to take images and to put into Unreal and create, you know, point clouds for other things. And the level of technology that's out there is just growing. It's just a different part of it. And if you're focusing on just one aspect of just the images that you create that's being mined or done, but remember too that you're posting them publicly. So you're actually putting them in an environment and saying that's okay. And under copyright law in many countries, publishing something publicly, giving something published in that kind of environment releases them from your rights, because you're willing to put your information up there. So you're blaming them for taking what you give them. And that's not necessarily something to think about in that way. You have to look at it from both sides.
I would say as well, I do think that privacy is definitely a concern, right?
Oh,
I don't like the idea that, like, you know, Google is using like Google Photos, or Adobe using like private Photoshop documents as training data. That does seem like something that's
I agree with that
addressed
100%.
with, yeah. But yeah, imagine, you know, you were saying earlier, and this is a comparison that, you know, myself and some folks I know have made before. It's like when photography was invented. Imagine if when photography was invented, it was made illegal to take portraits, like portrait photos of somebody, because it would have been taking work from portrait artists. Sounds weird now, but back in the day, it's probably the exact same conversation we would be having right now. So it's be interesting to see how history shakes out, but I think that that's actually going to wind up being a fair comparison.
And look, right now, if you went into Midjourney and you designed a really cool car as concept art, and you put it out on Instagram, and then suddenly an engineer from General Motors got that and decided to actually make that car, in the way that the laws are right now, you'd have no protection. You'd have no ownership over that IP. So things like that have to change. And they have to figure out a way to integrate this type of technology and the creative and the intellectual property, and it's all going to evolve.
Something else I'll mention as well is a lot of folks are worried about like concept artists. I follow a lot of concept artists on Instagram. A lot of them are very anti-AI. They feel like it's stealing their work. What I will say is, a lot of times, the work that they're complaining about losing, they were never going to get anyway, right? The people that are using these tools were never going to hire a real artist. They were going to, you know, open up MS Paint and make something, or hire their you know, cousin who they heard knows Photoshop to make their concept art for them, because they can't afford real artists, right? So in that way, they're not really losing anything. Nothing's being taken in that sense.
Wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah.
And had a couple passionate arguments with
You leaned into that with a comment, Mauricio, so go for it. Yeah.
No,
And I look at it, I mean, you just look at the generational things. I grew up as a still photographer, product still photographer. I don't know too many people who make a living as still photographers doing product photography anymore, because everybody's got a camera. And it's a format and things that I laugh. You laugh at me because I actually carry a piece of film around. And Eddie keeps going back to the history of all of this because I talked this morning in one of the classes about, there's an image, it's called Roundhay Gardens. It was taken in 1888. And one of the people in the picture died the next day and started the whole conspiracy theory about, you know, it's going to take your soul if somebody takes your picture. And there's actual true reference to that kind of information in historic databases. And I find it really funny.
It would explain a lot about the world today.
Yeah, and you know, and I kind of laugh. You know, you put it in Midjourney, and you're usually generating the information in a public forum on Discord. So you know, we're stuck there too. Anything last from you, sir?
I would say that you say that now you don't know how many people do product photography. I can tell you that being a cinematographer is the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. Being a cinematographer was something respected, prestigious, because you were the only person who knew how the image was going to look, right? But now it's with the little cameras that gave everybody the possibility to shoot a movie. Now everybody's a cinematographer, especially also if you have a phone.
And on that, I would like to thank all of you. Mauricio Rubinstein, ASC, member Jay Holben, author and everything, and Chicago and Smash Virtual Studios owner Andy Jarosz. I'm Gary Adcock. We thank you for coming and joining us for Gen AI and the Cinematographer.
And nobody threw anything at us. I'm really kind of surprised. I was ready for it.
You know, you have to be when you do this kind of stuff. It's one of those things that there's always somebody who's, you know, it's like they're looking at one side but not the other side.